We're coming in hot to give you our hot takes on all the latest mental health news.
From headlines and memes to developments and breakthroughs.
We go into this show blind with the hopes of learning something new.
Before sharing some bunny hugs.
And leaving with our eyes wide open. I'm Nick.
And I'm Todd. And this is Mental Health Headline Hot Takes.
We're glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Mental Health Headlines Hot Takes with Nick and
Todd.
And we're going to spin the wheel to see who goes first or makes the decision to go first. Stop.
Spin again.
You could stop.
Statement of gratitude from Nick again.
Is it just from me? What am I?
I have my own.
You know, it's funny because I actually have been telling other people to practice gratitude, and I've kind of like slowed down myself. So I am, you know what I'm grateful for actually this week? I'm grateful that the weather has been so nice the last 2 days. Oh, it's kind of hot today, but it's allowed me to kind of spend a little more time outside that I hadn't been able to, because we've had some awkward weather, but it really makes a difference for me to like be able to be outside. And especially at night when I can like sit on my rooftop and watch the sunset, that is very relaxing to me. So I'm grateful for that.
Wow. I have a mental image of you on a rooftop watching the stars, drinking a glass of wine with your dog. Sounds nice.
That's kind of how the summer goes. And stop.
Nick goes first.
I was going to say, I swear to God, if it's another statement of gratitude. All right. So Nick goes first. This article is on clasp.org, which is the Center for Law and Social Policy. That's what CLASP stands for. The article is written by Tatiana Villegas, and it is "We're Still Not Listening: Why Young People Don't Want to Talk to Therapists." So this article, it took me a little by surprise because I feel like millennials and Gen Z are much more open to talk about mental health. But what's interesting to me is that I think millennials are more comfortable with like therapy. But if younger people aren't, it's interesting because I feel like they are able to talk about it on TikTok or Instagram. So this caught my attention because I was like trying to square the circle in my head. But this is a report that was done off of a focus group in Colorado in 2023. And the quote to start the article says, "I feel like when talking to somebody you don't know, you sort of have that feeling that they might judge you or not believe something that you're saying." That's one of the focus groups. So what it comes down to, and it's a long article, obviously the link is below, but what it comes down to is young people don't want to talk to therapists, and that 60% of them would be considered major depression, and they're not seeking help from mental health professionals for several reasons, but the big reason is that they don't trust them. And so I found that interesting because I remember, and I think sometimes I still do it when I talk to my therapist, especially at the beginning, you do hold some stuff back. And I think one of the other things is that there's obviously like going to be some age differences in some cases. There's going to be communication that's different, all of that stuff. But I just feel like the lack of trust, I understand. I feel like it's your job and the therapist's job to sort of nurture that therapeutic relationship so that trust builds over time. And I know one of the things, and I talked to mine about this when I first started with her, I have to like, if this is going to work for me, like I have to know you're a human being. So like, you don't have to tell me everything about your life. Like that's totally fine. But like, I want to know, how was your trip? How was your vacation? How's the family? You know, like
boxers or briefs.
Right. I'd probably draw the line a little before that, but you know, just funny stories. Like, you know, her dad is a season ticket holder for the Chicago Bears, and he's been the longest. And so every year they would like deliver his season tickets to his door from the owner of the Bears. So like cool things like that makes her human to me. And obviously we've been working together a long time, so it's different, but yeah. I do feel like
that's give and take a bit.
Yeah, but you have to find
Yeah.
those ways to build that therapeutic relationship. And also, it's okay if you don't feel comfortable with someone at first. You don't feel comfortable with your friends at first. You don't feel comfortable with your significant other at first. It takes time to build that. And I think you should think of therapy as the same way. It's not like a magic pill for going into it for one session or a handful of sessions and then boom, you're cured. It's like an ongoing,
Mm-hmm.
applying it to real life and learning things about yourself and why you act the way you act and all that. And that takes time. So that would just kind of be my thoughts on it. But I understand
Mm.
and think it's totally valuable when you're younger to think, oh, well, I don't want to go talk about my feelings with someone that I don't know or someone that I don't trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we had trouble with our one son. He was like not into it at all. Now, he's into it now, but it took him a while to warm up to the idea. And I know when I was young, well, actually, I'm curious, have the numbers dropped? Like, was there more kids going, or is it
So
just,
it doesn't say that. It was like a
oh, okay.
focus group. So they probably talked to
Oh,
like
okay.
10 people,
Right.
I would say. But they say it did
But
take
yeah,
place over like the last 6 years, I think it was.
okay. Because I know when I was younger, yeah, it'd be like, if I'm not vibing with this person, then, I don't want to share with them. And as an adult, you have the choice to like, I'm going to look for another therapist where they maybe don't have that option. It's like, no, this is your therapist. And it's almost like telling someone to get sober, telling a kid to
Hmm.
talk about their feelings. It's like, talk about your feelings. It's like, nope. It's like you almost want to double down, Um, so yeah, I know it's tough for young kids, and plus, like we've talked about before, people of that age their brains are developing,
Yeah.
and it's hard to process and to rationalize what the hell's going on, even when
Totally.
someone's doing it for them and explaining it. It's still like, it's almost like doing homework too for some of these kids, where it's like, oh god, like I don't want to do that. Then I have to work on myself. Like, good god, can't I just go smoke some dope?
Seriously. Well, I did my first time doing therapy was probably like when I was 21 or 22, and I wasn't ready at all.
Yeah.
I hadn't figured out. I remember every week I was talking about whatever drama was going on with my girlfriend. Like it was the
Right.
dumbest shit in the world. And it was just like when I look back on it, I'm like, Nick, those were not real problems. And I feel like that's you got to do a little bit of that in therapy, right? Because who else is going to listen to you all the time? But I do feel like you have to be ready. You have to be willing, like you said, to walk away. And if something isn't working, it can be uncomfortable, but you can talk about that with your therapist. Like
Right.
you can say, now I'm saying I've never done this, but you can say like, oh, you know what? This part of how we talk doesn't work for me. Or think to yourself, here's my advice, I guess. I'd love for you to share some advice to young people thinking about or not thinking about therapy. I would say think about what you would need to feel safe and not scared to share in that space. And then think about what you can do, your part in that. And then if you have a therapist, ask them how they can help you or what they can do, I should say, to get to that space where you feel comfortable. Because it's
Mm.
not going to happen overnight. And I think that's part of the challenge is that you have to build that relationship. So if you think about what it would
Mm-hmm.
take for you to feel comfortable in that therapy office or Zoom or whatever you're doing it, and then
Mm-hmm.
realize like your part in that and their part in that, and then have that discussion and have it early, I think that could be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think too, like probably when you were a kid, you just didn't quite get it. Like,
Mm-mm.
okay, I'm going to therapy to talk about what's bugging me, but that's not really what's bugging me. I have chronic anxiety and depression,
Right.
and these are just scenarios that are happening at school that, yeah. So it's tough, but I think us talking about this stuff more often, I think maybe kids are getting it a little more that, it's not scenarios, it's a bigger issue that you have to
Yeah.
like talk about. And when they give you tools and strategies, actually use them and not poo poo them. Because that's another thing I did when I was younger.
Oh yeah.
When I was going to therapy, I'm like, I'm not doing that. That sounds
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, you know what's funny is I remember like when I was
Gratitude.
going, right. When I was going, when I was younger, when I was like 21, 22, I remember she would tell me like, help me with, or kind of help me like with communication. And the funny thing is like, yeah, you can use like I statements and stop saying you. Like I was learning those things. But then the funny thing is like, you go and apply them. And if the other person isn't applying them back to you, it's like I would be like, well, it doesn't work. And it's like, well, I'm changing myself, but I still can't control somebody else. And so that's when like the tool becomes, okay, what are my boundaries and what are my expectations for this relationship? And are my needs being met? And if not, can I effectively communicate what I need? And if that can't be done, then I walk away. Like that's the whole process right there. Like using I feel and this made me feel this way, like that's great, but if the other person isn't doing it too and isn't willing to hear you, it, it that's a
Yeah.
learning in its own.
Yeah. That's right. And I know a lot of kids, kids, young, even teenagers or whatever, they have a hard time putting what they're feeling into words.
Mm.
So then, when you're sitting with them, they're like, so then I know that's happened with my son because he's been going for a while off and on. And at first it was like pulling teeth, like just try to what's going on. It's like, he just couldn't tell us.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he didn't want to, I don't know what the hell's going on.
I think too, like one thing that's important that maybe people don't know, because I think like what it takes to become, so there's like different kinds of therapists, there's psychologists, there's psychiatrists, like understanding all of that I think is part of it too, but they're all trained to like recognize bias and not allow that to influence their treatment. Like they have to stay culturally competent. They have to be aware of stuff, even if they haven't lived it or don't understand it. Like they have to be very self-aware to make sure that their biases aren't impacting their work with a client. And then on top of that, they have an ethical code and responsibility that if they cannot get past a bias or they do not feel they can help you in the way that they're supposed to, they have to recommend you to somebody else. So that's all in the code of ethics. And I think that's important for people to know too, from like a trust perspective, is there's all sorts of protections in there to protect what you share in therapy with your therapist, including underage people. There's some things that obviously have to be reported, but there are a lot of things that stay between a therapist and their client, no matter the age. So just be aware that there's definitely, and are they perfect? Probably not, but there's mechanisms in place to check bias and stay culturally competent and all of that stuff too.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that. Especially the like, okay, if I'm just making you spin your wheels, I'll recommend you to someone else. Because I think a lot of therapists are like, deep down inside, it's hard to be self-aware too and judge yourself and be like, am I actually helping this person or not? And one of the best sponsors I ever had in AA, it was like after a couple months, he's like, dude, get another sponsor. Like I'm not good and I don't feel comfortable. I was like, oh, thank you for being honest. Like, yeah, awesome. I will look for another one. Yeah. But, okay.
All right, you're up.
Look, Bumble knows you're exhausted by dating. All the must not take yourself too seriously and 6'1" since that matters. And what do I even say other than hey? Well, that's why they're introducing an all-new Bumble with exciting features to make compatibility easier, starting the chat better, and dating safer. They've changed, so you don't have to. Download the new Bumble now.
Okay, so this is BC, which is a province of British Columbia and Saskatchewan, asked to reimagine masculinity as part of Men's Mental Health Month. So
it is Men's Mental Health Month.
It is, and I never keep track of this stuff, but because
how I feel about them.
Yeah. But I wasn't going to do this article, but I started reading, and there were some really good quotes from some people here. This is from the Chilliwack Progress by Thomas Ellie. Carl Bilson, director of operations at the Anti-Violence Project, says about 70% who commit suicide are male. She said, our society just hinders men's capacity to connect and to relate to others. The gender expectation that we put on men and masculinity is unnecessary and doubles down the harm. As someone who supports survivors of violence and someone who works with men, I feel we cannot separate these two, which I love that saying, because it's not saying women don't need help too. It's saying like a lot of men's mental health issues can turn to violence, which then, you know, if you're helping men with mental health issues, you're helping everyone, like it's women included, because there's less abuse and all types of things. Men who are being asked to reimagine masculinity, and I think it's because of society's ideas of what women were supposed to do and who was supposed to bring the income and who was supposed to raise children and all that.
So funny. I just talked about all of this with my podcast episode today.
And she says that's all been flipped on its head. Then I have a few more stats here. In 2022, of the more than 227 British Columbians who died of suicide, so 227, 184 were men. Additionally, there were a little over 2,500 toxic drug deaths in 23. 71% of those were men. Grant McKinnon, communications of the director of Our Place, says there's a lot of shame around being unhoused, even for those who eventually find a house. Many men do not want to share their experiences for fear of being negatively judged. And adding to the problem, men often go into the bushes like a wounded animal and isolate themselves because of shame and guilt and everything else. So yeah, they touched on homelessness, addiction, mental health issues, and how the number in males is like far exceeds women. But by helping these men, you're also helping women.
Right.
Yeah. So
I agree.
That's that. Yeah. There were some good quotes there. I like that they didn't just like pamper men and, whatever, like not make excuses for them either. Right. It's like, okay, get your shit together. But also it's like, how do you do that though? How do you generations of men?
So much that goes into it. It's like, it's almost hard to grasp because of the conditioning essentially of what the culture and society puts on men.
Yeah. And in the article
and women,
they touched. Yeah, of course. Yeah. They did touch on like baby boomers and like that whole attitude, from their fathers coming home from war and basically, man up and all this stuff. So then it's, there's that stigma and mentality, and you're put that in your brain when you're 4 years old, and now you're 50 years old and you're homeless. You're still trying to man up, and so there is a bit of that, and I can actually, I haven't worked a full time or even a part time job in months, and I feel that shame too. That's like, I'm not a provider. I have a lot of guilt and shame around this stuff all the time. Luckily my wife is very understanding in that, but because I have a bit of that conditioning still, right? I'm 46 years old and live in a small town with a lot of hardworking prairie boys, and people look at me like I'm lazy, and I was like, it's hard to shake sometimes.
Yeah. Fuck them.
Well, the problem is they're also suffering from mental health issues, but they're getting in fights and drinking.
Exactly. So, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So you can shame them for that. No, I'm kidding. You shouldn't shame them. But no, I think it's super important. And what I really think too, there's so many, it's not even just culture, like life, I feel like used to be easier. And I'm not saying that there were less mental health challenges or whatever, but I think there probably were. And that could be argued, we weren't diagnosing the right way. But like you think about, and I'm not saying this is the right way, but you think about how it was in the 50s and 60s. And it was like the man goes to work for 8 hours a day. The woman takes care of the family, the house. The man comes home. They both worked. The woman didn't get paid, but the guy was then able to provide for the family so that it didn't become a dual income requirement, which is where we are now. Like everybody's got to work. Like I don't know very many where only one person works, right? So it creates like, it adds that kind of stress to it. It adds the kind of stress of economic hardship. It adds, the generational trauma is a piece of all of that. And then everybody's a little bit more on edge because now, you don't get to relax and be done with work for a lot of people. Or if you do, you're physically, if it's a physical job, you're physically exhausted, and then you got to go home, and now you got to probably help with the housekeeping and the yard work and all this stuff. And it just keeps piling on. And I think it, on top of generational trauma, it really just sort of like compounds and snowballs into, just awful
avalanche.
Yeah. Awful.
Yeah. And I mean, back in the 50s, you didn't need a university degree. You could just have a full-time job and have a house and a car and stuff. And last week we were talking about the food bank, and they're saying the biggest demographic right now, or not the biggest, but the highest rising demographic are people that work full-time. So it's like even people that work full-time can't even afford food, let alone support an entire family.
To be considered middle class, I should look this up before I say. I think I saw. So the middle class, according to a 2024 study by Smart Asset, the middle class income range in the U.S. is between $52,000 and $155K. Now, I saw something yesterday. You have to have like $100,000, I think, to live in Chicago on your own. I think it was. That's fucking nuts.
Holy shit,
man. So,
yeah.
Talk about
I do live
stress.
Luckily, I live in a place where it's a little more affordable. But, well, even that, I mean, the city I'm moving to is the city that full-time people can't afford food. So, yeah.
So, it's brutal.
But,
anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered everything there. If you have any feedback, any articles you want us to look at, if you want to watch this on YouTube or listen to it on a podcast, all that stuff's below. But I guess you're either watching or listening right now anyway. So thank you for doing that. Anyway, till next week, I'm Todd.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
This has been our Mental Health Headline Hot Takes.
We're so glad you came.
Remember, when you heal yourself,
you heal the world.
Be sure to like this video, leave comments, and suggest articles for future episodes.
Hit subscribe to Eyes Wide Open
and Bunny Hugs and Mental Health.